Good afternoon, Grace family. Excellent to be here doing Daily Moment with you. Job chapter 3 is where we're going to be looking at today. Just kind of follow back up for those of you who have been following along. We just finished Job chapter 2, which talks about Job's three friends. And this is important to note. We noted this, I believe it was, maybe 4 or 5 days ago now. But that Job's three friends heard of all of the evil things that had come upon him. They each kind of partner together. They make an appointment to come together and to show sympathy and comfort to Job. And they saw him from a distance. They didn't recognize him because of just the just utter despair that Job is in, the experience that he's had, the loss that he's had, the now ailment that he has. They tore their robes, sprinkled dust on their heads, then heaven. And verse 13 says, they sat with him on the ground for 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. And so that's an important thing to remember, that's the situation we have. 7 days, 7 nights, no one spoke a word to him. They saw his suffering. It's very great. We talked about how sometimes just sitting with somebody in their suffering is the best thing you can do. Chapter 3, we're going to read chapter 3 today, and that's the context of chapter 3 is those 7 days and 7 nights are probably gone by, and now Job is opening his mouth to speak. So that's what we see in chapter 3. Let's take a look and read. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. And Job said, let the day perish on which I was born. And that the night that it was said, a man is conceived. Let the day be darkness. May God not seek it, nor light shine upon it. Let gloom and deep darkness claim it. Let clouds dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. That night, let the thick darkness seize it. Let it not rejoice among the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. Behold, let that night be barren. Let no joyful cry enter it. Let those who curse it curse the day, and those who are ready to rouse up Leviathan. And then the stars of the dawn will be dark, and let it hope for light, but have none, nor see the eyelids of the morning, because it did not shut the doors of my mother's womb, nor hide trouble from my eyes. Why did I not die at birth, come out from the womb and expire? Why did the knees receive me, and why do breasts that I should nurse? For then I would have lain down and been quiet. I would have slept and would have been at rest. With the kings and the counselors of the earth who rebuilt ruins for themselves, or the princes who had gold, who filled their houses with silver. Or why was I not a hidden stillborn child, as infants who never see the light? There the wicked ceased from troubling, and there the weary are at rest. There the prisoners are at ease together, and they hear not the voice of the taskmaster. The small and the great are there, and the slave is free from his master. Why is light given to him who is in misery, and life to the bitter in soul, who long for death, but it comes not, and dig for it more than hidden treasures, who rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they find the grave? Why is it light is given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God has hedged in? For my sighing comes instead of my bread, and my groanings are poured out like water. For the thing that I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, but trouble comes. Now, you may have kind of got the overall impression of what Job is saying. Now, what's interesting is that Job, throughout this entire interaction, has not sinned. And even here, Job is not sinning. But what I want you to hear is that Job is desiring that he never existed in the beginning. And notice here, Job doesn't have a death wish. We talked about this on Friday. Job's wife, verse 9, do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die. So Job doesn't have a death wish now. And Job isn't going to take his life. You notice that? There is no, I should just end my life. There is no suicidal ideation. There's no idea of suicide, that I should just end my life. Instead, he curses the day of his birth, and he wishes that it never occurred. He curses actually the day of his birth and the day of his conception. He curses both. He basically says, may God have never seen that day, may have never come to pass. May I have never been conceived. May I have never been born. Um, May that be so that I would never have to experience the torment that I am experiencing now. Uh, and I think this goes back to, in the very beginning, I mean, I think this goes back to the idea of understanding that sometimes this life is really hard. And for Job at this point, he's experiencing the most horrific suffering. He's not only physically in ailment, miserable ailment, the best that Satan can give without taking his life. And he has lost all of his children. He has lost all of his wealth. And even his wife at this point, in her agony of watching him, has basically said, do what's evil just so that you can make it stop. And all of this, Job has done right. And so he's like, just curse the day I was conceived. Like, it may have never been. And we see that in verses 1 through 10. Then verse 11, he's like, why didn't I die from the beginning? Like, why didn't I just come right out of the womb and then die? Why did my mom basically take care of me? Verse 13, I think, is interesting. He says, for then I would have laid down and been quiet. I would have slept and I would have been at rest. There's this element to which Job has an understanding of that death is rest. Death is being at peace. And then he mentions, like, with the kings and the counselors of the earth who rebuilt ruins for themselves, or princes of gold. These people have passed on before, that he'd be at rest with them. Verse 16, why was I not a hidden stillborn child, or infants never see the light? And then he says, verse 17, their wicked cease from troubling, and there the weary are at rest. He's like, there's no issues. We're at rest, we're at peace. The prisoners are at ease. They don't hear the voice of their taskmaster. Those who are slaves and who are prisoners of others, they don't hear the voice of their taskmaster. Instead, they're at ease. And the small and the great are there. The slave is free from his master. There's this element to which everyone is in the same place and in the same situation. Now, we know from New Testament teaching, this is ultimately what oftentimes is referred to as Hades and the death, right? This place that all go awaiting the judgment of God in the final days. And Job seems to understand that I would go there and I would have peace from my misery. In verse 20, listen to his current estate. He says, why is light given to him who is in misery? Why is it that you wake up the next day when you're in misery? And why is life given to the person who's bitter in their soul? God, why don't you just end my life? Who long for death? Job at this point, he wants to die, but it doesn't come. And he would love for death more than hidden treasure. Who rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they find the grave. There's this element to which he's looking forward to when the grave finally takes him. And why is light given to a man whose way is hidden, from whom God has hedged in? This is the idea that God is against him. God has set his face and his way against Job, and either God doesn't see it or God doesn't care. And there's an element there, I think, that we begin seeing that. Verse 24, I think this is describing the absolute agony that Job is under. He says, my sighing comes instead of my bread. He says, what I take for food is the sighing, right? That just like I would ingest food, my sighing is what I live by. My groanings are poured out like water. This is my daily account, that I sigh and I groan, and just the pain and the frustration, and just the misery that I'm in. That's my lot. That's what I get. Those are my meals. That's what I eat, is my sighing and my groaning. In verse 25, for the thing that I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. Ultimately, the things that are the worst that I could have possibly imagined, that's what happens. And ultimately, verse 26, I'm not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, and trouble comes. Right? This idea that Job is just completely in distress. And so we have to understand, this is the suffering that Job is enduring. This is the suffering that Job is experiencing. And look, in here, there is nothing that he says against God. He certainly says, may God, never have let me exist. He says, may God not seek that day of my existence and my conception, my birth. But he's not cursing God. He's not saying, God, you are evil. God, you are not righteous. He's not declaring injustice to God. He's not saying any of those things. Now, he will at some point come to that, and he'll edge on that. And God deals with that with him. But he certainly does come to the place in the perspective of, I wish I never existed. And so I want to encourage you with this, because this is a hard thing, that God can handle our place of where we are. And if we're feeling like, God, you are making me endure on an everyday basis suffering, he can endure our frustration and our releasing those emotions to him. And ultimately, you need friends that are going to be able to listen to this. And that's exactly what Job's trying to do, is Job's trying to relieve what's going on with these friends of his. And we're going to see that these friends end up turning against him, accusing him of injustice and something that he's done wrong. And we know ultimately that's not the case. So Job's upset. Job is struggling to handle what's going on in his life. And here's what I think of in a New Testament reality, right? New Testament reality. We're not going to ever be in a situation like Job, in that we have more revelation than Job had. And let me give you one key example of revelation. 2 Corinthians chapter 1 deals with Paul and some of the struggles that Paul had. And Paul was someone who suffered greatly as well. Listen to what he wrote to the Corinthians regarding their suffering and how God responds to their suffering. He says in verse 3 of chapter 1, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all of our affliction, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God." So just pausing there for a second, Paul recognizes God as a God of mercy and a God of comfort. And those are two things that sometimes I think we forget about. God comforts people. And in this word here, comfort, I just want to kind of draw your attention to this real quickly. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit so you can see a little bit better. It's to cause someone to be encouraged or consoled. And that's what it means. It doesn't necessarily mean to be comfortable in the sense of that everything is just super easy. That's not what it means. It means to console somebody. So God consoles our spirit, and he is a Father of mercy. He comforts us in the midst of our affliction for the purpose that we might be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort that we've been comforted by God. And so as God comforts us, we might be able to then turn and comfort others in their affliction because we've experienced the comfort of God in amidst it. In verse 5, Paul continues, he says, "For we share abundantly in Christ's suffering, so that through Christ, if we share abundantly in comfort too." As we share a part in Christ's sufferings, we share a part in his comfort. And that's exactly what Paul's saying. Verse 6, "If we are afflicted, it is for your comfort and salvation, and if we are comforted, it is for your comfort." Now think about this. If Paul and his cohort are suffering, it's because ultimately that God's going to then comfort in the midst of them. And he's going to then use them to comfort them in their affliction. And it's also for salvation because they're promoting the message of the gospel. And then he says, if we are comforted, it is for your comfort. Again, so as God comforts Paul and the other men that are with him, that he is then going to then comfort them. And so that's why it's for their comfort, which he then says, which you experience when you patiently endure the same suffering that we suffer. Now here's the thing, sometimes we have to patiently endure suffering, and this is exactly what Job is having to do in Job chapter 3. He's having to patiently endure suffering. At this point, Job doesn't have what we have in the gospel. He knows that he needs an advocate before the Father. He knows that he needs a redeemer. We're going to get there at some point. But those are two things that Job doesn't know that he has yet, because Christ is only a small picture at that point. But we have that now. And so we can endure that suffering with patience because of the fact that we know that it's going to have a positive end. Verse 7, "Our hope for you is unshaken, For we know that as you share in our sufferings, you will also share in our comfort. And this is the reality. The reality is that as you share in the sufferings of Christ, you will share in the comfort of Christ. And you will find peace there that you cannot comprehend. Paul even goes on to say, for we do not want you to be unaware, brothers, of the affliction that we experienced while we were in Asia, for we were so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired of life itself. And this goes back to how much suffering you could endure. And Paul's saying we despaired of life itself. That's the kind of suffering we endured. Indeed, he says, we felt that we had received a sentence of death, but that was to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. He delivered us from such deadly peril, and he will deliver us. On him we have set our hope that he will deliver us again. So you must also help us by prayer so that many will give thanks on our behalf for the blessing granted to us through the prayers of many. So this is the idea. All of the suffering that we endure may teach us one thing, that we may rely on God and not on ourselves, because it's so easy for us to rely on ourselves. But the suffering that we endure has the opportunity for us to rely not on ourselves, but on the God who provides mercy and the God who provides comfort and the God who we can place our trust and hope in, that not only is he someone who manages and redeems us from circumstances and brings us oftentimes into better ones, but even if our suffering leads us to death, that God is the God who raises the dead, and he can deliver us in the end into his rest. And so that's why we can have confidence in him, that's why we can have trust in him, and that's why we can anxiously await the coming of him and the restoration of our souls. So that's what we have, thinking about suffering and enduring suffering, and how do we handle that in a Christian way. There's certainly more that could be said here. Love to get your interaction if you had a question or a comment. God bless you all. Have a great rest of your Monday. Looking forward to doing this with you again tomorrow. Take care and God bless.